Germany goes to the polls shortly in a crucial national election. 3 candidates are vying to replace Angela Merkel, who's stepping down after a remarkable 16 years as chancellor. And it appears to be an open race. Merkel has widely been seen as a key global player during her 4 terms in office, but she leaves behind a Germany mired in crisis. Climate change, corona pandemic, Afghanistan are all casting a dark shadow over her departure. So, on to the point we ask, the crisis manager departs, what comes after Merkel? Well, thanks very much indeed for joining us today. And my guests here in the studio are Kerstin Gammerlin from the German daily called the Süddeutsche Zeitung, or SZ. She says it looks like Germany is going to be governed by a 3-party coalition, but whether that coalition will be led by Olaf Scholz is still very much an open question. Also with us is Deutsche Welle's own Chiponda Chimbelo, a senior editor and commentator at DW. He believes that voters face a really tough choice. After all, he says the future direction of Germany is at stake. And a warm welcome to Malte Lehming from the Berlin-based Tagesspiegel newspaper, who argues that it's quite possible that even on election night we won't know who will be Germany's next chancellor. The difficult task will be to form a new coalition government. Kerstin, first question to you. I saw her recently described as the eternal chancellor, but it is not so. Angela Merkel is now finally departing. How much are we going to miss her?
I think that we will see that only when she left, first of all. But I think in terms of politics, I'm not sure that we will miss her a lot, because how we can see now at the last decade of her chancellor, being in the chancellery is full of crisis.
Yeah.
But personally, I must say, for me, Angela Merkel was not only the chancellor of the United Germany, but since I'm coming like her from the eastern part of the country, so for me, she was also the woman that came from the east, that knows the interests of the east. And we have not seen her governing for the east of Germany, but for the United Country. There is no doubt about that. But I was sure that in her head and in her thinking, she always took also the interests of the former GDR into politics. And I think that I will gonna miss from the next, because the 3 candidates, none of them is from the east. They are all from Western Germany.
That's very interesting. Chiponda, Angela Merkel, we might, I think, miss her more than we actually imagine. Although in the past year or so, her legacy, her record, seems to have been a little bit tarnished, seems to at least have lost a little bit of its shine. Is that a fair comment?
I think that's a fair comment. I definitely think that whereas she is sort of a uniting personality for Germany, and a lot of people see that and feel that, and she's been great at managing crises. What she hasn't done is really create a vision for Germany to go forward with, and that she hasn't done a good job with. And a lot of people have realized and recognized that she hasn't had a vision for what Germany should look like in the next 5-10 years, even post her era. And I think that's part of the issue with her leadership. She's been great at managing crises and finding a lot of compromises in certain issues. But what is the vision? What is the future? And she hasn't really done that for Germany, I think.
What is the vision? What is the future?
There was a chancellor, Helmut Schmidt, who's always said, who needs vision in politics should go to the doctor. So I'm not quite sure if we really need what you call a vision. We saw a crisis manager who was very modest, deeply informed about the substance of politics and about the substance of the topics she has to deal with. But we didn't see a crisis-solving person. I mean, all these crises, if it's the European Union, Ukraine, Corona, you can't solve the Corona crisis.
So what you're saying is that this whole crisis management thing was a myth?
No, not the managing thing. But solving the crisis is something else. I mean, you put the European, if it's the Greek debt crisis, or if it's the split between West European and Eastern European countries and so on, you just put it on hold. She's excellent in putting crises on hold, but not in solving them.
But the question is just, can you solve the European crisis as a person? I mean, you need a majority to do so.
Emmanuel Macron would say yes.
Yeah, sure.
In Germany, we always say no.
Exactly, that's exactly what I mean, because Macron clearly has a vision, clearly has an idea of what he wants to see.
Yeah, but he has a vision, and does he have the majority? I mean, that is the question.
That is the question. And there he would need Merkel, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. And that was actually the big mistake. Macron had a vision when he came into power as a president of France, and Merkel was really able, and she is able to find majorities. And it was really a pity that she did not, that two of them could not find together. So Macron was waiting for her to give answers to his questions, and Merkel just stayed in the chancellery saying, perhaps, and she didn't do anything on that.
You're completely right, but I think the next step of the answer would be we won't miss her because all possible successors are clearly try to follow in her footstep. Because they don't have radical different politics, different agenda, things like that. So yes, we might miss her as a person, but not her politics.
OK, let's go back to the election itself. Three parties have put forward candidates to become the next chancellor: the Christian Democrats, the Social Democrats and the Greens. The three candidates themselves are hardly unknowns, but people are asking whether they have the stature to be at the helm of Europe's biggest economy.
Armin Laschet is the CDU's chancellor candidate. He's been fending off attacks from fellow conservative Markus Söder from the Bavarian CSU, but remains unpopular among the Conservative Party's voting base. He's seen as an optimistic politician who has, however, little charisma. He had a major mishap during this year's floods when he was filmed laughing in front of flood victims and volunteers, people who needed consolation and support. The gaffe was followed by a 20% drop in the polls, a record low for the CDU. Annalena Baerbock is the Green Party's chancellor candidate. She started off strong, with her party even briefly taking a lead. But public trust in her dwindled as it became known that she'd padded her resume and that a book she penned is full of plagiarism. She apologized, but her polling numbers sank. Many people feel vindicated in their belief that her colleague Robert Habeck would have been a better candidate. Olaf Scholz is Germany's current finance minister and the SPD's chancellor candidate. The former Hamburg mayor is seen as rock solid, but boring. His inter-party rivals are mainly left-wing members of the SPD, but they've been keeping a low profile. Scholz began his campaign with 14%, but has benefited from mistakes made by his rivals. Now he's considered the favorite for the chancellery. Scholz, Laschet, or Baerbock? Who will succeed Angela Merkel?
Well, that remains to be seen, but I think what we can expect from our three guests is that they're going to give us a little bit more colour. If people coming from abroad, looking at Germany, interested in Germany, what do they need to know about the candidates and about the election that's coming up? What is vital?
Maybe we should start with Annalena Baerbock, the Green candidate. We heard some about her life, her biography, her problems in the beginning because of plagiarism, switching in the biography too much. She had a very great start in April when the Greens came up like to 20% in the polls. But then she suffered a lot of setbacks and some really personal attacks on her own. And what speaks in her favor is that she survived all of them. She became even a better statue out of it. What speaks in her favor again is the topic of climate change. We all saw the flooding in parts of Germany. And so the topic of climate change it's in everybody's mind. Mm-hmm. So the big question is just looming. Could she go one-on-one with the Recep Tayyip Erdogan, with Vladimir Putin, with the Xi Jinping? Nobody knows. Mm-hmm. But that has to be seen.
But I would like to remind that when Merkel came into power in the chancellery in 2005, then the former Chancellor Schröder said, "What, this person? She can't do, she won't do it." So and now we have seen that Merkel did it very well.
Back then, she was now where Annalena Baerbock more or less is now. You would
more
have
or
to
less,
say.
yeah. Okay, Merkel had already won the election, but more or less in a situation in which people say, "Oh, she cannot do it." But let me come to Olaf Scholz, this solid candidate, which many people say he's a very boring person.
You have observed him very closely in recent times.
Yeah, I was following the last 4 years when he was finance minister. I was with him in the US, seeing him talking to Janet Yellen, or I saw him in the Bundestag and other, or in Venice, G20. So I have seen him a lot. And I must say, he is reading a lot of books and he's talking a lot to people in his environment. And then he is taking his decisions from reading and from talking to others. And he's a very solid guy. He joined the Social Democratic Party already when he was 17, I think. And so he is a marathon man.
Oh,
so he has a very long career already. He had it already in politics. And if you look back, for instance, when he was the mayor of Hamburg, he got the party together, the Social Democratic Party. He did win 2 times the election there. And in terms of housing, which is a big problem in Germany now, he did very well, and also for kindergartens and other things. So people know when they elect him, they know what they get. A boring person, but a person that is in a way intellectual, but he is quite able to do something.
A boring person, perhaps, a competent person, perhaps a thoughtful person, perhaps, but he's also somebody who has a propensity to sort of rub up a little, I'm being very cautious, rub up with against the world of banking, finance, where he has a lot of
I mean,
yes,
I mean, he has some mistakes, of course. In a long career, he did. There were some mistakes also in the banking world, or let's say Wirecard. Many people know about this famous German entity that suddenly went bankrupt and 20 billion euros or dollars just were in the air, disappeared. Yeah. Exactly. But on the other hand, what many people think about Scholz is that he's doing something against inequality. And let's remind you also that Germany is the country in the world where social inequality is very high in the Western world, and it's growing. And many people think that he is the guy that can stop that.
OK, very important point. Chiponda.
Well,
Mr. Laschet.
Mr. Laschet, yeah. I mean, I get Mr. Laschet. And the fact is, I mean, I used to live in NRW. I used to live in Bonn before moving to Berlin. So I actually was there when he...
North Rhine-Westphalia, the German state, big German state.
And he is the state premier of North Rhine-Westphalia. And I mean, it was a surprise when he won the elections against Hannelore Kraft, who was running for the Social Democrats there. So he's sort of the underdog who might be unexpected, you know, who literally delivers unexpected results. And this is sort of what happened when he was selected to be the leader of the CDU and also the CSU as, you know, as chancellor candidate. In terms of his personality, he's sort of under-delivered so far, unfortunately. I mean, he has done a good job in the past, but he's under-delivered in the last couple of months in the campaign. And he's struggling. He's trying to show himself as a worthy successor to Merkel, and that's part of his problem, because you have Merkel, who has been a unifying figure for Germany for the last 16 years, and he has to come you know, to show that he can follow up to that, and at the same time show how he can be different from her. So he has to be similar to her in some ways, but somewhat different, and he's really struggling to cope with that expectation. And what we saw in the last TV debate of the 3 chancellor candidates, it was him pretty much trying to appeal to the solid base of the Christian Democrats. That's what his final argument was, that he would be this person who would, you know, deliver stability and everything that Merkel has done, essentially. Of course, you know, during the, you know, the discussion and the debate, he did try to show that he was different, but in doing so, he was also criticizing Merkel, you know, in a way, even though he was directing himself to the Vice Chancellor Scholz. So that was interesting to watch as well. So he probably has the toughest job in the campaign in a way, because he has to follow up to Merkel, and that is really hard. So I think he has the most difficult job. It's sort of, you know, if you've seen other elections, if you're trying to replace an incumbent who's really popular,
but
that is really hard, I think.
I don't know whether that's the case, because I clearly remember 3 months ago, the Social Democratic Party had, I think, 15%, and everybody thought, oh, what does Scholz do there?
Exactly.
I mean, this is a race with 2 candidates.
Yeah, exactly.
And now suddenly we have 3 candidates. So basically, I don't know whether Laschet was in the most uncomfortable position.
He wasn't in the most uncomfortable position 3 months ago. But I think essentially, if you're coming in to replace an incumbent who's extremely popular, and you try to show that you're similar to that incumbent, and at the same time that you're different from them because you're going to improve on certain things, that is really hard, because you sort of have to be in a contradiction in yourself, and that is really a tough job for a person.
I think you mentioned the value of stability, the expectation from voters that in times of turbulence, from Corona to Ukraine to climate change and so on, the flooding and so on and so on, the expectation is who's representing the need of stability. And we have Scholz as a vice-chancellor who was part of the government. He might be the one. But you have Laschet as one from the CDU, who was always the party of the chancellor itself, who represents stability. So it's a race between 2 persons. Both of them are trying to symbolize, vote for me because I represent stability. Is
that the top and bottom of what Germans wish for from their next government? Stability? I mean, everybody's saying what they really need is a kickstart. They need modernisation. They need digitalisation. They need a government that's going to...
On top of stability, I would
top of
always
stability.
say.
They want change, but nothing has to
They
change.
want climate change and digitalisation and things like that. And I would say, yes, they want these things, but they are not ready for new eruptions, societal eruptions.
And it's kind of interesting that you mentioned that, because you can clearly see from those 2 candidates, Scholz and Laschet, that they are trying to appeal to this idea of stability and Germany representing stability and not rocking the boat too much. And I think that's the point. And so I think it is something that they're clearly aware of. And Baerbock is sort of the, you know, the fresh... sort of something different, somewhat.
But even she, in her rhetoric, is not so much a radical green with climate change. She always mentioned the social dimension of climate change policy and things like that. Try to go to the middle and try to appeal the feeling of the electorate that too much eruption won't be good at the time.
But even that is already too much for
Exactly.
many.
I would say, I think for Germans, that is radical.
Yeah.
I mean, we hear talking about,
Germans are not radical.
you know, flights within Germany being banned, or they say they just want to ban everything. They just want to ban everything. And of course, they're trying to appeal to the German need for stability and sameness, if you like, and that's what really they are trying to
But what
do.
I really missed in the past, I must say, is that Merkel could have helped Laschet a bit more. I mean, why not that she's going out every second day saying, oh, Laschet is a good candidate? She could have done that. But she said, oh, no, I don't want to step in the election.
She doesn't want to steal his thunder.
Yeah, but I mean, she's a CDU. She's a member of the CDU. And now there's a battle that another CDU member should come into chancellery. Why doesn't she support her own party member? I mean, she could do that.
Well, I think this week she tried to do that by, you know, clearly calling out Scholz against, him not speaking out against red,
yesterday,
green.
yes, but yesterday was the first time. The first time.
So that was interesting.
When everything is burning in the party, it's the first time she's coming out with that.
And that's interesting, and I thought that was interesting that she clearly called him out, and in that way spoke in favour of, of Laschet, and was supporting him in a way without necessarily saying, I'm here and I'm campaigning for Laschet, which is exactly what you would expect in other countries. We haven't seen that happening in Germany. So I think for me as a non-German, it's always interesting to see that dynamic and why that's not happening.
I'm not sure if it helps Laschet if Merkel would be more backing him. They have a good relationship. Laschet was the one who supported her without any conditions in the refugee crisis in 2015, 2016. The moment she stands behind him much more is the moment she takes away the light from him to her. If they were, suppose they are in public and she has a speech and he would have a speech, whom do you listen to? To Merkel. So that would show a contrast between them two. I don't know if it really would help.
She could put the spot on him.
Okay. I'd just like to change gear just a little bit, because Malta already mentioned a list of sort of crises that we're facing in recent times, and it really is a time of crisis, many people would say. Let's just have a look at some pictures there and talk about Merkel's management of these crises and where else we can expect that kind of management from.
Crisis number 1, climate change. Germany experienced it firsthand in July. Floods in Western Germany killed at least 180 people and destroyed infrastructure, houses, and apartments. Now, climate change is a central campaign issue. Crisis number 2, Afghanistan. Directly following the withdrawal of troops from the Hindu Kush, the Taliban seized power again. Almost 20 years of counter-terrorism missions by the German army were in vain. Terrorism once again poses a major threat. Crisis number 3, the coronavirus pandemic. The endless fighting between the government and Germany's federal states made fighting the virus effectively more difficult. Many people reject the rules altogether, refuse to wear masks, and have protested in the streets, leading to violent conflicts with the police. Will the approach to these 3 crises decide who wins the election?
What do you say, Chipanda, to that question? Will who's going to deal with these crises best, or who can promise to deal with the crises best, and how is that going to impact the outcome of the election?
Well, in terms of who can deal with these crises best, we've seen what the ruling party, the CDU, can do, the Christian Democrats, because they've had to deal with these crises so far. In terms of proposing something different, I would argue and say that the Greens have, at least out from the 3 candidates, are proposing something entirely different. And for the voters who are fed up with what the government has done or are not happy with that, potentially the Greens is the way to go.
You're talking about the Greens, you're talking about climate change and addressing the existential threat of climate change.
And also social inequality, those 2 things, which are coming off the back of the coronavirus.
The Greens have a much more radical, because in moralistic terms, in foreign policy. Annalena Baerbock says we have to get stronger with Russia, more stronger with China and things like this. I'm not sure if the majority of Germans are willing to follow her on that, because they are quite satisfied with this not unsettled situation in the Ukraine, with having to, we sell our products, our cars to China, don't anger the beast too hard. So if Annalena Baerbock really is in power and you see these things come through, I'm not sure if the majority of Germans will follow her.
I mean, potentially not, but I would say that most people don't vote on the basis of foreign policy. And we know this from other countries. We know this from the United States of America. And I also know this from discussing, I can't vote in Germany, but I know this from discussing this with a lot of Germans. Even the ones who are interested in foreign policy are not thinking about foreign policy when they're voting.
Basic,
exactly.
That's true.
And based on that, we are looking at someone who's going to solve problems and issues which are sort of right at the doorstep, and that would be climate change for sure, and the coronavirus pandemic, and the foreign policy is less so an issue for voting.
It's an important issue, nevertheless, but it's not the basic one.
Exactly.
Do I understand right? Climate change is going to be the decisive issue in the outcome of this election.
One of. I'd say one of, and social. I'd say also inequality.
I don't know whether
as well.
You can say that climate. I mean, many people saw now. We have seen the pictures of the flood. And many people are attacked by climate change now, and they see that, and they feel that is real. But nevertheless, they say, so even if I sell my car now, I take only my bicycle, at the end in my lifetime, will there be a change to the good? Can I really, so I change my life, but the result of what I'm doing, can I see that? Or is it for my children or for my grandchildren? And so I think people will not only vote because of climate change. I think there are really social issues in Germany.
I would agree.
What I mentioned already, the inequality and the housing prices, you know, there are really the housing prices are going up in Berlin. You have seen that in Munich and all big towns. So people do not earn enough money to pay
This is a really important
rent.
message about Germany, that people look to Germany and believe that it is
and taxing issues. Who has to pay now for climate change?
And that's what you see with these Christian Democrats. They've said that they've done a good job of having a stable economy, but what they haven't done a good job of is of fighting social inequality. And in terms of inequality within Germany, it's been growing,
Yeah.
while, of course, people can get jobs. But if your job cannot pay your
This
rent,
sounds like
that's
a Social
problem.
Democrat Party meeting here.
No, but I think it's social justice without any doubt, but it's innovation as well. I mean, what the lesson of the corona crisis was that we are quite unprepared in schools, in universities, in entrepreneurs, to deal with the digital
Bureaucracy.
Yes, with all these affairs, and that other countries are far ahead. And so I think innovation to be competitive in a globalized world is one of the main topics in the election as well, besides of social justice, which is always a German topic.
OK. On those wise words, we'll have to leave it there. We've run out of time, I'm afraid, folks. It's been a great show, though. I hope we've given you plenty of food for thought ahead of the election, which is now getting closer by the day. It's tense and it's exciting. And stay with us to find out more. Until next time, bye-bye and tschüss.